Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm, of course, Ethan Evans. I would assume you all know me. But this session was suggested by one of our content partners, Omar, uh, with the idea that it's very interesting to ask, how can you drive a culture of innovation in your team? Not how do you innovate personally, although I'll touch on that, but how do you systematically drive a culture of innovation? And it's really interesting. I've had this scheduled for a while. I was polishing up the presentation today, and I got an email from one of my clients who's a vice president at a large company, and she needs to discuss this same topic with a leadership offsite of 100 or more directors and VPs at her company in a couple weeks. So you're not alone in being interested in this topic. It's everyone's interested in it because it's tough. So, what do? Let's jump in and have some fun. So, you already know my bio. There it is officially for anybody viewing this later, because we do record these and some people see them later. But here's today's agenda. I'm going to go through a presentation. We have a set of pre-submitted audience questions that Jason has screened. We'll go through those because they're pretty good. And then we'll do some open Q&A from the audience until we hit the 1 hour mark. And then I will go have dinner with my wife. So what is culture? This is not yet culture of innovation. We need to talk some about culture. And I want to talk about culture before I talk culture of innovation, because I'm also asked a lot, how do you simply build culture? And if you know how to build culture, you can then build a culture of innovation. Whereas if you only know about innovation, maybe you can't generalize. So the dictionary defines culture as the customs, arts, social institutions, and achievements of a particular nation, people, or other social group. Your team is a social group in this context. A much simpler definition that my old coach, Sue Bathanis, uses is how things are done around here. That's the culture. How do we do things at Google or Bank of America or Tesla or whatever, Travelers Insurance? What is the culture? How do we do things around here? What are the norms? Okay, so if culture is the norms, how do they get established? There are two main inputs to culture. One of them is structural. So many of you, even if you don't work at Amazon, are familiar with the Amazon leadership principles, at least to know that they have them. So that's a type of stated culture. We're writing our culture down. The U.S. Bill of Rights is a stated culture. Now, that culture has the force of law, but it's still a stated culture: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc. How are these things implemented? Well, the Bill of Rights is implemented through the power of the law and the government. The Amazon leadership principles are implemented. There's a letter missing in this, right? I have a typo. Interviews, reviews, and promotions. So it's implemented through those mechanisms. Then there's stories or history. These are the war stories, the origin stories. And I have here in parentheses, U.S. Army unit culture. It turns out a lot of the cultural research in the U.S. was driven by the military. And let's take the U.S. Army as an example. We all talk about reorgs and turnover. Well, the interesting thing about the U.S. Army is they reorg on a schedule. They replace commanding officers on 2-year rotations in almost every unit. And the officers come and go to very different things. You might be leading a tank battalion one day and working in the Pentagon the next rotation, and leading, helicopters or recruiting or logistics the next time, or, whatever. So their leaders are not only turning over, they're turning over into very different functions. So how do you maintain culture with planned reorgs? Well, interestingly, of course, the only difference between the Army and all of our jobs is we don't know when our reorgs are coming, whereas the Army has them on a calendar and can plan on them. But different units in militaries all over the world have stories and names, and that's a way of preserving culture. So, if you were to look at the British military, where I am no expert, their different units have names: the Highlanders, the this, the that, the Black Watch, and these units have a history where, even though all the people who are in any way involved are long dead, they have a record on the wall that says, well, this unit fought in this battle in 1860 and in this battle in 1750 and on and on. And you, present day soldier, are now part of this tradition. And this is what our unit stands for. Now, at your company, you're unlikely to be building on a 300-year military tradition. But your company can have origin stories that get passed down that set a culture. And universities are another great example of this. Universities love to have they name their buildings both after big donors, but also after their most famous professors, their most famous researchers. If somebody gets a Nobel Prize, they get a building. Why? Because you're setting a culture of, we do Nobel Prize winning research here. That is our culture. So, you want to build culture, think about your symbols. And those symbols help you create a team, including an inventive team. So the best way to have an inventive team, or a best way, is to celebrate and tell the stories of previous inventions in your team or in your greater organization. Now, the last part is, of course, rewards. What reinforces a culture is what is rewarded or punished. So the U.S. venerates cowboy behavior, entrepreneurship. It doesn't venerate in the same way bureaucracy, right? We have a lot of it, but there's no such thing as a bureaucratic hero, right? There's no movies made about great bureaucrats you might have known. So all of these things help set the culture. If you're the leader or you're trying to create a particular culture, including a culture of innovation, you think about those process and structure pieces because they can outlive you. Now, the leader is also a big input on culture. And by the way, the Army agrees on this. The Army trains all its leaders the same way, but it recognizes that even with identical training, those Army leaders will be different humans. And so it's not enough to just train all the leaders the same way. So, as a leader, what drives your impact on culture is, of course, what do you talk about? What are you spending your precious voice on? Well, if you want an innovation culture, you better be talking about innovation. If you want a hard work culture, you better be talking about diligence. However, people also watch what you do. Do you invent? Do you support invention? Do you punish people who try to invent and fail? Do you praise people who try to invent and fail, right? Your behavior speaks at least as loudly as your words, though they both matter. So these are the inputs to culture. And that's any culture, including invention. So one of the seminal researchers on this is a guy named Edgar Schein. And I've read some of his other books. I haven't yet gotten through this whole book because it's big. But if you want kind of the guru level knowledge of culture, go to Edgar Schein. His definition of culture is a group's shared assumptions and behaviors that are learned over time. And he feels culture has three main components. There's the artifacts, so the visible aspects of a culture, dress code, physical space, observable behaviors. Well, obviously, if you have an invention room or an invention trophy showcase, or Amazon gave out, I probably even have some here, little awards for people who patented inventions. And so you would see people with a big collection of patent awards. Well, a big collection of patent awards is one way to have an artifact that venerates invention. Second, espouse beliefs and values. So this is what you talk about, the values and norms that are commonly held. This is where the Amazon leadership principles fit in. This is where the military unit would fit in, the military unit origin story. Third, you have the unspoken assumptions, the unconscious beliefs and or values that are taken for granted by a group. And I want to tell a story here that was brought to my mind earlier today, but I realized it's perfect to illustrate this. And it was about an unspoken cultural value and how quickly that value changed overnight at Amazon through one simple action. So at Amazon, for a long time, leading up to about 2008 or 9, it was considered unspoken. There was no official rule against it. It was considered extremely bad form to poach talent from another leader. So to go recruit internally and try and talk someone into moving to your team was considered such bad form that if you did it, another manager would come to you and tell you to knock it the hell off. And if you didn't, they would go to your manager and your manager would tell you, you can't do that. You're out of line. Stop. It was a very strong culture. And it was an angry culture about it. Like, you don't dare do this. It's low. Then one team put up some posters in the elevator that didn't approach any specific person, but said, hey, we're hiring. Like, our team needs people. And this triggered a firestorm of debate of whether or not this violated the poaching value. Is this poaching? To advertise, not to talk to people, but to just say, hey, we're hiring. For whatever reason, it was decided that it was okay to put up a poster. Well, literally within weeks, every team in the company had posters. And the norm against poaching evaporated. So, comparatively now, a long-held cultural value, unspoken, undocumented, not supported by all this other stuff, changed very quickly overnight through as simple a mechanism as posters in the elevators. What's the point here? Sometimes culture isn't that hard to change, particularly if people have a lot of motivation or pent-up motivation around it. You simply have to show them that a new way is possible and acceptable or approved, and they will change incredibly rapidly. So, consider, if you want an innovation culture, consider what in your team is holding it back and what would cause an overnight culture change. So before we go to how to get your team to invent, I want to do the 3-minute version of my own opinion on invention. How do I invent? It's not complicated. Some of you have heard this before, but when I want to invent, the first thing is you have to know enough of the basics of an area to be competent. The example I use is, let's say I wanted to make cancer drugs, or one of you did who's not a doctor or a biologist, or chemist maybe. You lack the basic knowledge. At this point, you're unlikely to, just like I am, successfully invent a new cancer treatment because we don't know enough about the subject matter area. So, step one is you're going to need to know a good amount about the area in which you want to invent. Now, most people are already there or they're close, but I would point out sometimes you need to be constantly feeding yourself the new and cutting edge ideas if the space is moving fast. So the easy target to pick on right now is if you wanted to invent something new in AI, the space is moving so fast that keeping up with enough of the knowledge to be dangerous and relevant is going to be hard. Second element, this is where I find a lot of leaders struggle. They don't actually spend any real time thinking about invention. Their to-do list drowns them so much, and their inbox and their Slack and their family and their need for sleep, let alone basic hygiene, etc., that their quiet mental time to actually think isn't there. So probably a lot of you have heard the Thomas Edison quote, invention is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Well, you need to be putting in the perspiration time. So second part of inventing is you have to actually work on it. The third part I call use the whack pack. I've talked about this before. There's an app available on phones. It's also a physical deck of cards available on Amazon called the Whack Pack from Roger Von Oech, O-E-C-H. This is a set of prompts that will shake you out of your thinking. They're just basically different lenses or different ways to cause you to think about things in a new way. And most of invention is Newton's apple hitting him on the head in the story. You need that prompt, you need that stimulus that causes you to think differently. Doesn't matter where you get it. If the whack pack isn't your answer, that's fine. Find your stimulus. So do those three things, you'll be more inventive. This is not a course on personal invention, but you need to be basically doing some invention yourself in order to showcase this to your team. Because if you don't bother to invent and you're not inventive, then my role model within my team is not valuing the thing that you're telling me to value. I'm less likely as a team member to bother myself because, hey, you're not doing it and you're in charge. Okay. The last point I make here is most of the people watching are somewhere in the broader technology space. And we get tempted as technologists, whether we're engineers or we just work in that space, to think every invention has to be like AI. It has to require $1 billion of hardware and $1 billion of VC work, VC funding, and it has to be based on new chips. I kicked a cord, sorry. Let's make sure everything went dark for a second. I just want to make sure we're still good.
We still see you, Ethan. So
you see me, but not the screen. It says screen sharing disconnected. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny that you kicked the cord.
Kick the cord. All right, we should be good. I have plenty of battery. Anyway, it should be fine. And I'm not on battery, I don't think. But don't kick the cord under your desk. All right. So the last thing is not everything requires new technology. So some of you have heard these examples before, but I share them quickly, which is 3 simple inventions I love to point to: toilet seats, shower curtains, and Band-Aids. Toilet seat. All of you have had the experience, of course, of putting the toilet seat down and you drop it and it makes the horrible loud bang. Within about the last 10 years, someone had the bright idea of we can put a gasket in there, and now the toilet seat eases itself down and it doesn't bang anymore. Now, here's my point. Somebody's making a lot of money off new toilet seats, and toilet seats have been around for over 100 years. In fact, longer than that. So it's possible to innovate with trivial thing if you can simply see the problem. The same thing is true of shower curtains. All of you have taken showers, both in the shower with the straight bar where you feel closed in, and the shower with the curved shower bar that leans out a little. Well, I actually did the research. I can for sure, I think they're older than this, but shower curtains go back at least to the time of the American Old West in like the 1880s. So they're at least 150 years old. But it was in the last less than 20 years that somebody thought, you know what, we could make that thing curved. Again, it's about seeing the problem. It's not about fancy technology. The last example is Band-Aids. So I once drove by a really big house out on the Washington coast on the beach, and I asked some people who owns that really big house on that beautiful piece of land. And they told me, oh, that's the person who figured out that if we take the normal Band-Aid, which kind of had, you know, the part you put over the cut, the little patch that absorbs the blood, and then 2 strips of tape, the normal Band-Aid, those strips of tape are kind of pinkish. They're made to match the skin of mostly white people. If we make those clear, then they blend into people's skin and they match everyone's skin. And so by making the tape clear, we don't have to make multiple shades of Band-Aid, and yet they match everyone. That person has a big house on the Washington coast because they had the idea to make Band-Aids clear on the end. So you don't have to necessarily feel free to use technology. Do not use technology where you do not need it. And so when you're teaching your team to innovate, or when you're innovating yourself, be very willing to be lazy and low tech if that will get you a better customer result. Okay, a few more things, then we'll hit the questions. I hope. There we go. All right. So finally, we get to the detailed slide about how do you get your team to innovate. Well, we already talked about culture. You have to have both the process and personal support. What are you doing personally to support this? Amazon has a leadership principle as one example, which says that all employees are supposed to innovate and simplify. They're also supposed to think big. Now, this is simply an example. The point is the company cultural mechanisms are setting an expectation of innovation. It's written in there. So that's one piece. We talked about knowledge. You have to have your team members, if you want them to innovate in exactly what they're doing, they already have the knowledge. But if you want them to innovate in something new, you're going to have to help them get the knowledge. So if you have a team that, whatever, always built Android apps and now needs to build an iPhone app, they're going to have to learn about iPhone before they can innovate. And many other examples could apply. Again, if you have a team that you're having adopt AI tools, they're not going to innovate with AI until they understand AI tools at a basic level. The next piece is time. I told you on your slide you have to spend time. Well, how are you going to get your team time? One of the questions that was submitted was exactly this. What do I do? How do I get innovation if my team is crushed with deadlines? We'll address that when we get to the questions here in a minute. But I want to show you there are a few approaches to this. Google uses 20% time. Everybody's heard of this. The idea that you can work supposedly at Google, and I understand it's still true, you can spend up to 20% of your time working on work of your choice. A second classic way, to give you an example, is running a hackathon. Saying, oh, on this weekend or this Friday or whatever, we're taking time off and we're all going to hack, you know, and it's going to be an approved activity to build prototypes of new ideas. There are many different ways to do this, but the point is, if you want your team to innovate, you have to give them time to innovate. If you're working them at a death march pace, you're not going to get any innovation. 2 reasons. 1, they have no time. 2, their brains are too tired and stressed out. So there isn't a death march innovation solution. I mean, at some level, of course, there is, if people are properly motivated, right? Starving people are very innovative about how to get food. Cold people are very innovative about how to be warm. But given that you're not going to normally put people under such extreme pressure of a survival situation, that may not get you the same results. Next piece, rewards. The biggest reward for inventors is to see their thing made. If they can't see their own thing made, they at least want to see that other things are getting made so that they have hope. Because doing a bunch of invention that never goes anywhere is frustrating. Why am I bothering? I'm clearly wasting my effort. If I keep giving you ideas or giving you prototypes and nothing gets built, I'm not stupid. I will stop. Or I'll go fund my own company and do it. But I won't keep after it right here. Next, in the end, if you're a company, you've got to give the people some sort of value or acknowledgement. Why am I doing this for you? Am I getting a bigger raise? Am I closer in line for promotion? Am I getting an award or a trophy? Some companies give like a stock award for people who file patents. Amazon wasn't one of those. I wish they had been. But people expect something in return for their creativity. Otherwise, why? Why do they expect that? Because they're putting in time. So they're expecting some payoff on their time. Otherwise, they should watch YouTube. Finally, they need to know it's safe to fail, right? That if their invention isn't a good idea or you don't like it, you will say thank you, not wow, that was stupid, right? How you lead. So a couple quick stories. Number one, many, many, many years ago, at a different company, pre-Amazon, I put up the digital equivalent of a suggestion box where I asked members on my team to make suggestions for how to improve what we did. One guy made at least one suggestion every day. He overwhelmed me, and I ended up doing nothing with most of his suggestions because I was trapped in the loop I've just talked to you about, where I was too busy trying to execute to think about all the new stuff. Very justifiably, he got frustrated with me. He quit suggesting things, and he was somewhat bitter about it. That was bad leadership on my part. But I want to be clear, that's exactly what happened. So don't do what I did. Don't ask for more inventions than you can reasonably pay attention to and give feedback on, and try to take some of them forward. Now let me tell you a completely different story on the other side. 10 years ago at Amazon, roughly, I was leading the Amazon App Store. I had a very large team of many hundreds of people. And I had two people on that team who really wanted to see Amazon enter the travel business. They wanted to get Amazon to build a travel app. And whether you think it's a good idea or not, you'll see that it at least has some potential. The idea, once we worked on it, was to build something like Pinterest for travel, where you could pin up where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do while you were there. And you could use it as like an open collaborative planning board. But then we would also support it to where you could pull in other people's pins and other people's experiences. And you could pull in potentially things from vendors, where vendors say like, oh yes, I have a tour of the Vatican, etc. Now, some of this functionality exists today, but 10 years ago, it was less prevalent. So imagine this idea is not me too. It wasn't at the time. The point of this is, I ran the App Store. The App Store had nothing to do with building apps, and my team members had nothing to do with building apps, except the App Store app. But how did we got this idea to a complete BRD, if you will, a business document in Amazon, a 6-page proposal, as well as a working prototype demo. And I did it all, or we did it all, by reaching out to my team and saying, hey, we have this idea. We need some people to build a prototype. It isn't official work. You have to do it nights and weekends, not part of your normal job. And we don't know if it will go anywhere. We had plenty of volunteers to build a prototype, and they built it in a few weeks. We then were able to take it to Bezos. Super long story if you want the punchline. Jeff told some of his VPs to look into it. One of his VPs told me, I will fund this team, or SVPs, sorry, one of his highest leaders, said, I will fund this and help you, authorize you to build it. I'll support it, but you need to come lead it, Ethan. Like, I'm not going to hunt for a leader. You need to stand behind your idea. You're not just going to throw it over the wall to me. There's two lessons there. Number one, I was doing this more for my team members who wanted to build it, not for me. And so I told him, look, I can send you my team members. They're motivated, but this isn't actually my passion. This isn't something I can come do. That wasn't good enough. So you've got to be willing probably to get behind the ideas of your team if they're going to get funded. Second, though, we were able to get very far down the road on 100% volunteer effort. And that's where the time came from. People want to work on fun, cool things. They want to work on different things. And if you give them a chance, they'll volunteer their own time to do it. Now, I had a team of 800, call it 500 engineers. 10 people volunteered, 1 in 50. Most people aren't inventors. Most people don't want to do extra work. So when we talk about having a culture of innovation in a team, do not ever mistake that for everyone on your team will be an inventor. But you also don't need that. Inventions take a long time to build. I point this out a lot. So let's say Tesla. Call Tesla an invention. We want to build electric cars and an electric charging network. Well, they've been working on that for decades now. Let's take AWS. We're going to have virtual computing in the cloud, or Google Cloud, or Azure. Again, now 2 decades old already, right? It's already closing in, not quite, but almost 2 decades old. On and on and on, good ideas, you only need a few to take you through a career or a lifetime that get funded, right? You don't need thousands. You need a few good ideas. Okay, moving on. Here's a couple books. I already talked about the Whack Pack from Roger Von Oak, but the other one to consider is called Hackers and Painters. Paul Graham, founder of Y Combinator, I believe. If you want to know how to invent, how to disrupt, this is a couple places to start. And of course, you can give these to your team members. All of you here, however big your team is, the bigger your team is, the more you're paid. The deck of cards I talk about costs $8. If you take however big your team is and multiply by $8, you want to send them a symbol that you prize innovation. Buy everyone on your team one of these Whack Packs, right? If you have 10 people, it'll cost you $80. But if you have 10 people, you're paid enough to afford $80. If you have 1,000 people, then it would cost you $80,000. No, $8,000. And if you have 1,000 people, you're also paid enough to afford that. So you can make a symbol out of any of this. What would that convey to your team, right? That's how you set culture. So this is my standard ad for I teach classes. You should take them. And where to find me. All of you already know this because you're members of the community. Let's talk about questions. Here's the first one I mentioned. How do we cultivate innovation culture? Cultivate culture when you're always in the crisis of delivering against tight deadlines? The first answer to that is you can't, right? It's going to be, if your team is burnt out and your management, this is important, only wants you to dig trench faster, it's going to be very hard. Innovation takes investment. But if I'm in this situation, what I do is I pull my team together and I'm honest with them. And I say, are you sick of our constant death marches against deadlines? Me too. Unfortunately, our company is a death march culture. You can say it more nicely, but this is our culture. This is our situation. Our only hope is to invent our way out of this. So what we need to do together is, while we're still working hard, bailing the water out of the boat so we don't sink, we better invent some plugs to plug the holes in the boat. And so we need to invent our way out. If you don't like that analogy, use 50 others. The point is, you have to inspire them that invention is their escape from the endless death marches. Now, again, if you lead a team and you ask this question, some of you will say, and some of your team members will say, I can't work any harder, and why should I? Why is this my problem? But not everyone. The last thing in Pandora's box was hope. And so you give people hope that if they help you invent better ways of doing things, if they create automation tools, etc., that your team will get ahead enough to have the headspace to then not be up against so many tight deadlines in the future. Hopefully this will turn out also to be actually true, as opposed to your company going, oh, you're a little bit ahead, here's 50 more things to do. You may, in fact, going to use polarizing words because this is a polarizing question, you may have to lie to your management about how busy you are as you start getting free time, right? You may have to keep whining about how overloaded you are, even as you get a little space because your team has invented things. That's okay, do it. If you're in such a septic culture that it's nothing but death marches, you don't owe those people anything. All right, right? You only owe them, like, if you're in this culture, you really should be getting out. So it's okay to treat the culture as well as the culture treats you. What strategies can help shift the dynamic away from a focus on cost cutting and scaling to contributing to early stage innovation? It says without relocating, which I guess that means not moving out of the team. Well, cost cutting is, there are two ways to make money, right? Quote unquote, make money or increase profits. Spend less and earn more. So you have to help your company believe that by inventing, you can make more money. The usual way to do this, again, unfortunately, is go make an invention on the side, go show it to a customer, get that customer rabid to want to pay for it, and then come back to the company and say, well, you know, our biggest customer, Acme Inc., really wants this thing. It works. Here's a demo, but we need time to build it. Now, that's a lot to do, but that is, you're not going to convince. What the person asking this question wants is some set of magic words to say. There aren't any magic words to say. You're going to have to actually invent something of value and then show it's valuable, and then people will change their tune, maybe, particularly if there's money attached. But companies that have mature products, and you're on the team that's about scaling those mature products, you're not being paid to invent. You're being paid to cut costs and scale mature products. So you're going to have to convince them that they're better off paying you to do something else, and they're only going to believe that once you show them a potential invention. See what you want, whoever wrote this, you may or may not be here, you may or may not ever hear this. Hopefully you do. But you want to be given the time to invent and then show that your inventions are good. That's not how it works. It's you put in extra time, you show you're a brilliant inventor, and then you get space to invent. Once you've invented a bunch and shown that you have a track record, then this is what, right? What do we call people who routinely invent valuable things and make a lot of money from them? We call them serial entrepreneurs. And when a serial entrepreneur who's built several companies and exited several times goes out on the market, they have a line of people willing to give them money saying, please do it again. But they earned that position. You don't get that position without earning it. Kind of true of everything in life, by the way. So If you don't want to earn the position, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I wish I could. What you want to do here sounds like more fun. All right. Thoughts on go-to-market strategy for startups and challengers to go after incumbents? Not really. This question is one somebody submitted. I could make up a bunch of shit about this, but I'm not sure what it has to do with the topic. If I try and interpret it narrowly through the lens of invention and innovation, your solution's got to be better. It's got to be better enough to get people to switch. So it's got to be cheaper, faster, easier, smaller. It's got to in some way serve some niche better than the incumbent. The one thing about incumbents is as they get bigger, they generally get more generic. They get more bloated. Think Microsoft Word. Think all the benefits currently in Amazon Prime. Think all the things you can do on Facebook and in the Meta family of companies. Things get bloated, right? So go make something simple again. Go make something that serves a smaller populace well. The current market rewards specialized solutions really well. And then once you have a specialized solution, you too can become bloated and generalize it to a large audience. But you start by being specialized and serving a few people really well. The classic book on this is called Crossing the Chasm. It's not listed here, but that's the classic book on how to do this. How do you change a culture or leadership team of no risk to embrace change and risk? You don't. What you do is you convince them that the risks are small. They have a fear, right? You're not going to make people who fear risk stop fearing risk. What you're going to do instead is reduce the perceived risk, or increase their fear of doing nothing to be much higher. So your two choices are get them to fear stagnation more, or get them to believe that what you're proposing is safe. So to get something to be safe, what you have to do is build a prototype, demonstrate it, get a customer, right? What have I said already? If you have a prototype and a customer willing to pay for it, then I've removed all the risk, more or less. There's still risk in the building and will the customer follow through and so on, but I've removed the risk. So you do those things. The other thing you can do, as I mentioned, is create fear of stagnation. Create fear that we're being left behind and say, you know, I talked to Google. I have friends at Google, and they are coming out with a product in 3 months that's going to do these things. We'd better get on it. Ideally, what you've said is true, but, you know, they don't know your friends at Google, and Google sounds scary. So you pick the scary Google in your industry, and you talk about what if you really wanted to be Machiavellian and dishonest, two things I don't support, but I'll describe, you can pick any boogeyman in your industry that your company fears and talk about what you think they're doing. And that will create fear of inaction in your company. So those are the two sides of that equation. We have a few more questions, then I'll take open questions. So how does one develop the ability to think innovatively continuously? On a personal level, put in the time. If you're not familiar with this, though, read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which talks about how once you have a cash cow, most companies pivot to protecting and enhancing the cash cow, not innovating further. Because enhancing the cash cow has a predictable return on investment, the working product, versus investing in something new has risk. And so what people don't see, though, is if I don't keep innovating, someone else will eventually come along and disrupt me. But since I can't predict when that will happen, and I can predict that by investing in my existing thing, I'll make more money, I keep investing and I keep neglecting innovation. If you want to do differently, there's a whole book on this, but it's very hard to get systems to do this. It has to be personally driven. Jeff Bezos used to say, if we don't cannibalize our business, someone else will. So you have to think about someone is going to take our business away if we don't do it first. And that's why, even though when I first built the digital video product that became Prime Video, Amazon made a ton of money selling VHS tapes and DVDs. But Jeff realized, those are going to go away. They're going to go digital, so we'd better do it ourselves. Well, this continues. You have to stay on top of that at all times. How do you find the right resources to follow up on good ideas? This question is unclear. It can either mean, how do I magically get resources, in which case everything I've said earlier about getting projects funded applies. Or it could say, how do I know the right people? Well, the right people are usually the inventors, the person who had the idea. So one thing you want to teach in your culture is that having ideas is great, but if you're not here to follow through on them, if you want to make clear to people that the phrase, I have a good idea for you, is going to be met with fuck off and die. I have a good idea for you is low ownership. It's let me give you my problem. It's I want you to do all the work and I want all the credit. I just want to think and I want you to do it. You have to create a culture of I have a good idea and I want to build it. I can't wait to build it. I have a good idea for you. That person needs to be smacked and educated. And then if they do it again, put them in the too dumb to learn bucket. Sorry. I warned you, when it gets late at night, I get harsh. And if you've ever done this, if you go to other people and tell them the good ideas you have for them, consider me smacking you right now, right? Because unless someone's looking for an idea and asks you for an idea and tells you that they have the resources to implement an idea, they're busy as hell with their own life. The real value is you not only having an idea, but a plan to build it. So the right resources are the builders, the people who have the energy to do something about their idea if you will just unblock them or help them or pave the road a little bit. But they have to have the fire in their belly, right? Quick story. All of you, because you're here, subscribe to my newsletter. I had no desire to build a newsletter. Jason came to me and said, I have an idea. You should have a newsletter and I can build it for you. So the reason there's a newsletter in a community and you're here is because all I had to do was say yes, right? And then I of course, support it. I'm here providing content for it. But he didn't come to me and say, hey, Ethan, you should really build a newsletter. Some other people suggested that to me as well. And I said, yeah, thanks. Because through the monitor, I couldn't actually reach out and smack them. Jason followed through. Huge difference. Why he's now my operating partner, my COO. He follows through. Well, you need to do that. Okay. How do you determine if the org isn't structured to be the right place to innovate technically, even if innovative in other regards? This question is also a bit tricky to follow, but I take it to mean, what if you have an org, or you're part of an organization that's willing to innovate but not technically competent, right? It doesn't understand technological innovation. I don't have deep thoughts on this one because the question is pretty confusing, but I guess the question here would be, well, you've identified this problem that it's not structured right. What structural change, since you're saying it's a structure problem, what structural change would make it capable of technical innovation? Is it resources? Is it leadership? Is it product vision? I don't know. But you've identified a structural problem. That must mean that you believe there's a structural fix. So, doctor, heal thyself. How do you see companies innovating if their leaders are slow to adopt or deny AI's transformative power? Could this shift open the door for younger leaders to take charge? No. If some company doesn't see isn't adopting AI, that company will die, but it will die with that generation of leadership in place. It's not like they're magically going to say, "Oh, hey, we've recognized we're dinosaurs and we're going to relinquish our power and our big salary for you." This will never happen. But those companies aren't going to innovate. And so if you see a company that thinks AI is a waste of time and they should ignore it, you're at the wrong company long term. Now, some companies have a more cautious approach to AI than others. You can also go too far on AI, potentially, and be the far side of this is you could be telling everyone that they must have an AI initiative each quarter. It's kind of like that ad that was for phones a few years ago where the one guy was saying, "I want the one with the more GB," right? AI has become a little bit of a magic fairy dust world. You want a company that's adopting AI and has a strategy to adopt and use AI thoroughly in their business. You do not want fairy dust AI. And so, where the shift will open the door for younger leaders is at new companies. If you're part of a company that has a valuable product but isn't adopting AI, ask yourself, how can I go disrupt this company outside, build the same product using AI, and take over all their market? That's what you should be asking yourself, is if this company's going to drive itself off a cliff because it's got its head in the sand, fantastic. How do I go start a startup that will be there to pick up the pieces? That's what I would do. All right. And so with that, we have a few minutes, only a few, for a couple live audience questions. Raise your hand. Who wants to ask me something about, specifically about innovation culture, not about whatever else you might want to talk about today? Krishnan, have at it.
How do you convince folks on the team, right? They want to innovate, but they have this fear of, they try to stay within their defined scope or their defined org boundaries rather than saying, okay, let's go beyond and let's have some friction, because they really don't want to upset others or worry about any kind of org boundary friction and so on. So how do we get them to change the mindset, even after telling them that you go ahead and do it, right? I'm here to take any heat which comes from it.
So, I think you have to show by example, right? People aren't going to trust what they don't see. But I would bet you have, let's just ask directly, how big's your team?
100 people.
Okay. Definitely within 100 people, you have at least one person who doesn't care about risk, right? So you get an idea from that person. Ideally, you have 10 such people and you get the best idea. And then you show everyone that you're willing to take the heat for that person's idea. And then they'll start to believe. Once they see you champion an idea that has friction, then other people will believe.
Good.
But in a culture where most people are afraid, you have to show them that it's safe. Okay. It's a proof thing, and you have to lead. You as the leader have to find a way to demo it, but you showcase. One of my favorite examples is an entry-level college SDE at Amazon is responsible for the invention of what got called Amazon Cloud Drive, our storage product. Now, it's not as good as Dropbox and whatever. It's a Dropbox Me Too. That's not the point. The point is, he championed it and Jeff backed him up. Well, he makes the perfect example to anybody else that he sent his idea to Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos said, yeah, let's build it. It opens the door to anybody having the chance. All right, Julia.
Thank you.
This is a follow-up. I'm wondering, how do you foster an ongoing commitment to a culture of innovation? It's not about, I checked a box, I did it once, but it's this continued need to keep innovating and going.
Yeah. Well, your company has to value it and reward it. I mean, it's all the things that allow you to do it once, just you have to make them systemic. So I don't like the word just. I want to go back and edit my answer. I realize it takes a lot of work, but whatever allowed you to do it once, you look and say, what does it take to make that systemic? So if we did a hackathon or we solicited ideas, how do we do that quarterly? If we rewarded people, how do we keep the ongoing reward? If we set aside resources to be able to implement, we said, oh, well, in our sprints, we're going to put 10% of our time on prototypes of new ideas. How do you make that a standing thing? Creating a culture of innovation is incredibly hard for two reasons. First, people get tired and are lazy, and it's always going to be safer not to innovate because innovation has risk of failure, and most other things we do on a daily basis don't. And so you have to continually make it safe and give reward. Second, your best innovators are probably high performers, and they probably have entrepreneurial genes, and so eventually they will leave. Because if you have a team and you have really good inventors, they can probably make more money going and starting their own company somewhere. And so keeping them is incredibly hard. So you have to be constantly creating new inventors. It can be done, but that's how you keep that snowball going. I don't know of a way to only do it in the culture. I said the culture is both the process and the structure as well as the leadership. I don't think you can have an ongoing culture of innovation that comes only from the process and the structure. It takes constant leadership energy. So it doesn't necessarily have to take a ton of leadership energy, but, Bezos gave out an award. I use Bezos because most giant company I know. He gave out an award every quarter called the Just Do It Award for people who just did it. And the Just Do It Award, classically Amazon, he would get a manky old tennis shoe with the Nike logo and hand those out as a prize. So it didn't cost very much, but it was highly symbolic of, and they tell the story, right? So on the main stage in front of the Amazon All Hands, he would tell the story of, this is what this team just did. And so then you're creating you're acknowledging and highlighting accomplishment. And that's what you have to do as a leader to keep it going, is you give people you want to let your team visualize, next quarter, I could be on stage with the CEO. That's what inspires them. They have to be able to picture that they could be heroes. I hope that helps, Julia. All right. Well, this has been fun. We're at an hour. Thank you all for coming. I hope you learned something. Several of you are regular attendees. Some of you were at the draft version private review of one of my classes earlier today. I'm glad to see you back here. I always make a point to compliment, we have like 2,000 people who have the right to come to this, and there's like 25 here. So the ones of you who are here are in the top 1% of performance because you're investing in yourself. So with that, I will let you go because I'm going to go have dinner with my wife. But it's been a pleasure. I'll see you all soon.